Hello everyone, today we will continue the journey with the single mother, Dieu Hân. After a long night wandering through the streets and sleeping with her child in her arms under the porch of a stranger's house, Hân looked down at her little one and whispered to herself, "I have to do something to survive. I can't let my child go hungry any longer." The next morning, Hân decided to go everywhere in search of a job. Yet, each time people saw her carrying her baby, they shook their heads and turned her away. Disappointment weighed heavily on her frail shoulders, but Hân refused to give up. On the way, she stumbled upon a lost wallet. Inside was a large amount of cash and important documents. Hân looked at her baby, then at the wallet, her heart pounding. If she kept that money, at least for a few days, they wouldn't have to starve. But she just couldn't. Using the information in the wallet, she decided to find its rightful owner. Hân carried her child and went door to door, asking around the neighborhood until she finally found the person who had lost it. When she returned the wallet, the owner was overwhelmed with gratitude and offered her money as a reward. But Hân simply smiled and shook her head. "No, thank you. I only did what anyone should do." After declining the reward, Hân continued her job search. By noon, she stopped at a small roadside eatery and timidly asked, "Excuse me, are you hiring? I don't need money, just meals to get by. I can do any kind of work." Seeing her thin but determined figure, the owner's heart softened and she agreed. From that day on, Hân became a helper at the eatery, working only in exchange for simple meals. She worked tirelessly, sweeping, washing dishes, cleaning tables, always quick and skillful. Her baby was also remarkably well behaved. While Hân worked, the child lay quietly in a hammock the owner lent her, sleeping soundly as if understanding how hard his mother was working. And for the first time after countless days of hardship, Hân felt a little peace. A bowl of warm rice, the soft breathing of her sleeping child, and a glimmer of hope, small but bright, began to shine in the heart of the single mother. After a long and exhausting day, Hân received a lunchbox in exchange for her hard work. But when she saw a poor little boy nearby, her heart ached. Without a second thought, she handed her meal to him. As for herself, Hân simply pulled out a piece of stale bread from her bag and quietly ate it, just enough to fill her stomach, just enough to keep her strength for the battle called life. On the way back to their temporary shelter, Hân and her child unexpectedly ran into the woman, the owner of the wallet she had once returned. The woman looked at Hân in surprise and then smiled warmly. "Oh my goodness, it's really you. Thank you so much," the woman said emotionally, her voice filled with gratitude, before gently asking about Hân's situation. When she learned that Hân and her child had been wandering with no stable place to live, the woman, whose name was Dieu, decided to invite Hân to her home. At first, Hân hesitated. She was afraid of troubling others. But under Dieu's sincerity and gentle persuasion, she finally agreed. When they arrived, Dieu kindly gave Hân a set of clean clothes and served her and her child a warm meal. It had been so long since Hân had lain on a real bed. Her baby slept peacefully in her arms, his little face serene. Not one to sit idle, Hân quickly helped sweep and clean the house, and even joined Dieu in the kitchen to prepare meals. Her diligence and respectful nature deeply touched Dieu. When Hân shared about her abusive husband who had come looking for her and beaten her, Dieu's husband, an upright police officer, immediately grew serious. The couple exchanged a knowing look and then nodded firmly. "Tomorrow," he said with conviction, "we'll help you and your child." In that moment, Hân's eyes welled up with tears. For the first time after so many days of wandering, she felt the comforting warmth of human kindness. When Hân left home for work, her abusive husband secretly returned. He kicked open the rickety door and stormed inside, destroying everything, from the small table and the old hammock to the little jar of rice they had. Blinded by rage, he smashed it all, then slumped down and drank himself into a drunken stupor. Hân returned to her humble home with the kind-hearted woman, Dieu, and 2 police officers. The moment her abusive husband saw her, he charged at her with a vicious glare, ready to unleash another brutal beating. But this time, he didn't stand a chance. The officers quickly stepped in, stopping him in his tracks and restraining him before things could get any worse. Realizing he couldn't fight back, he thrashed and screamed like a madman, then tried to run. But within seconds, the 2 officers pinned him down, handcuffed him, and dragged him straight to the police station. For the first time in what felt like forever, HN felt a small piece of justice finally return to her life. When everything calmed down, Thu turned to HN and held her hand tightly. Before leaving, she quietly slipped some money into AAN's hand and said, "Take it, dear. Think of it as a little help to start over." Staring at the money, AAN's eyes welled up with tears. All the bitterness and pain seemed to melt away, replaced by deep gratitude. Thanks to Thu and her husband's kindness, HN and her child finally had a chance to live in peace, something she once believed she could never have again. Peaceful days slowly returned to AAN's life. That morning, she brought a bundle of fresh vegetables she had just harvested to Thu's house, the woman who had always reached out to help her in her darkest times. Thu welcomed her warmly, kindly asking about HN and her child, while the neighbors looked at her with sympathetic eyes. For the first time in so long, HN felt a little warmth of humanity, something she once thought she had lost forever. On the way back to her small house, HN and her child were suddenly stopped by a woman who blocked their path. Her face was stern, her voice sharp. "HN, your husband's in jail. Who's going to pay me back now?" HN froze, clutching her child tightly in her arms. She stammered, trying to explain that she had no money, but the woman refused to listen. Instead, she threatened HN, stepped closer, and even tried to snatch the baby from her arms. Panic-stricken, HN could only scream for help. Just then, a man rushed in from a distance and stood protectively in front of HN. His voice was firm and commanding as he ordered the woman to stop. Intimidated by his determination, she finally backed off, leaving in anger while cursing under her breath. HN held her child tightly, her heart pounding in fear and relief. She looked up at the man who had come to her rescue, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Life had been unbearably cruel to her, but perhaps fate still had a sliver of hope left. And maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter. When HN bowed her head to thank the man who had helped her and was about to leave, he suddenly called out to her, "HN, do you remember me?" HN froze, her eyes widening in surprise. The man smiled gently. "I'm the one who adopted the baby boy you entrusted to me back then. He's grown up now. Thank you. If it weren't for you, I would never have had the son I have today." We and his wife even brought the boy out to meet HN. She had visited several times in the past, hoping to see him, but their paths had never crossed until this fateful encounter. Old memories came rushing back, leaving HN overwhelmed with emotion. We invited HN and her little son into his car, insisting on taking them home safely. Along the way, we asked her many questions. When he heard about everything she had endured, from the crushing debt her abusive husband had left behind to the days she and her child wandered without shelter, we fell silent, his eyes heavy with sympathy. When they arrived home, HN warmly welcomed we and his family. The 3 of them sat together, talking and catching up. The scene was simple, yet it was filled with a warmth that HN hadn't felt in a long time. Before leaving, we discreetly slipped an envelope of money into her hand, but HN firmly refused. "I can't accept this, brother Wee. All I need is a job so I can provide for my child on my own." We looked at her quietly and only nodded without another word. Yet, when HN returned to her room, he had secretly tucked the money beneath her small pillow, an unspoken way of helping her without making her feel uncomfortable. When HN discovered the large sum, she panicked and rushed outside, but Wee's car had already disappeared into the distance. Standing alone on the empty road, clutching the money tightly in her hands, tears streamed down her face. For the first time in years, she felt There was someone who truly wanted to protect her and her child. Thanks to Wei's financial help, HN was able to buy chickens and a few small animals, creating an extra source of income for herself and her child. Life slowly began to stabilize. HN worked tirelessly, hoping that little by little, she could build a peaceful home for her son. However, that peace did not last long. One day, AAN's step-uncle showed up. His face was twisted with anger as he banged on the door and shouted, demanding to know the whereabouts of AAN's mother. Even though HN firmly told him that her mother wasn't there, he refused to believe her. He stormed through the house, searching everywhere. When he found nothing, he threatened to burn down AAN's home and even raised his hand as if to strike her. At that very moment, AAN's mother suddenly appeared. She rushed forward, shielding HN with her body, determined to protect her daughter. The confrontation grew heated, their shouting echoing throughout the neighborhood. Finally, overwhelmed and unable to hold it in any longer, AAN's mother broke down in tears and revealed a secret she had kept hidden for years. HN, you are not my biological daughter. The words hit HN like lightning. She froze, her eyes wide in disbelief. Trembling, she asked again, but her mother only bowed her head, her voice choked with emotion. I'm sorry, HN. I never meant to hide it from you. I was just so afraid of losing you. After driving the step-uncle away, AAN's mother sat down and told her everything. HN had been abandoned as a baby, and her mother had taken her in and raised her as her own. She gently encouraged HN to search for her biological parents, the only ones who might be able to help her in these hard times. The only clue was an old, faded photograph and a vague piece of information. Her father was somewhere in the Mekong Delta. Even though HN was not her biological child, her mother loved her as if she were her own flesh and blood. The two of them clung to each other and wept. Her mother was heartbroken by the truth and terrified that HN would leave her, but HN only held her tighter and whispered through her tears, "No matter what, you will always be my mother." In that moment, HN knew her journey was far from over. A new chapter was beginning, a journey to find her roots, but one she would face while carrying the unconditional love of the woman who had raised her all these years. After her mother and step-uncle left, HN remained sitting motionless on the porch. The world around her seemed to fall silent, with only the faint sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. She said nothing, her empty gaze fixed on the familiar patch of ground beneath her feet, feeling lonelier than she had ever felt before. The words she had just heard cut into her heart like a sharp blade. So this was the reason her grandparents had always despised her, the truth behind all those years of rejection and sorrow she had never understood. Everything suddenly connected, and the realization was so painful that tears streamed uncontrollably down her face. HN buried her face in her hands, sobbing, not just because of the truth that had been revealed, but because of the deep sense of abandonment, as if the whole world had turned its back on her. Yet, amid the pain, she still thought of her mother, the woman who had raised and loved her as if she were her own child all these years. That love became the only anchor keeping her heart from breaking. Ever since learning about her biological father, HN had been unable to focus on anything else. In her mind, she kept picturing a man far away in the Mekong Delta, someone she had never met but whose blood ran in her veins. As she looked at her little boy sleeping peacefully beside her, HN gently brushed his soft hair, and a fierce determination welled up inside her. She didn't just want to find her lost father, she wanted her son to know his roots, to have the family she had always dreamed of but never had. And from that very moment, deep within AAN's heart, a new journey was born. A journey to reclaim the home she had been searching for since the day she was a child. Han packed her belongings and decided to set off with her son to find her father. Before leaving, she went to bid farewell to her neighbors. When she shared her story about her biological father, one of the neighbors couldn't hide her sympathy and encouraged Han to stay strong. Han also entrusted her small house and garden to the landlord for safekeeping and returned the money she had borrowed from Than. On the way to the bus station, Han happened to run into. When he learned that she was going to search for her father, he didn't hesitate to help, giving her and her son a ride to the station. Before leaving, Dan smiled and wished her a safe and hopeful journey. Sitting on the bus, Han tried to gather more information about the western region, the place where her journey to find her father would begin. The road ahead was long and unfamiliar, and she couldn't help but feel anxious since she didn't know anyone there. Yet, alongside the fear, there was a glimmer of hope that somewhere in that distant land, she might finally find the family she had lost so long ago. Thinking about the long road ahead, Han couldn't help but feel anxious. Would she really be able to find her father?
Nhờ có những người tốt bụng, người chồng cũ phu của Hân đã bị bắt, nhưng cuộc hành trình mới của Hân lại bắt đầu. Hân sẽ đối mặt với những khó khăn và biến cố nào phía trước trên con đường đi tìm người cha ruột của mình. Ở những tập video tiếp theo sẽ có những tình tiết mới hay và hấp dẫn hơn, hé lộ sự thật về cha mẹ ruột của Hân. Mọi người nhớ đón xem ở những video tiếp theo nha. Để không bỏ lỡ những video mới nhất, mọi người nhớ like, subscribe, bật chuông thông báo để nhận thông báo khi mình đăng video mới nhất. Cảm ơn mọi người đã theo dõi hết video. Rất mong được mọi người ủng hộ kênh của mình. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại mọi người ở những video tiếp theo nha.